Alright everybody, welcome back. It's me, Eric26MSDFS, bringing you a new video. Thanks so much for tuning in, you guys. Go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell for future videos. We're going to go ahead and be doing another Millionaire Maker lineup recap, this time for week number 5 in the NFL. Just wanted to start off with this notification that I got from Draftkings about playing in the Millionaire Maker Challenge. They did a extra bonus side pot, if you will, if you got the highest scoring quarterback wide receiver combo, which I had in my top scoring lineup in the Millionaire Maker, which was Deshaun Watson and Will Fuller. So I get an extra $6.52 out of everybody. Woot woot. But you know, six more entries into the single into the $1.20 entry max, and just getting more bullets, and it all adds up in the end. I'm not a one to turn down the crowns or the free promotions that they do, the rewards for if you play constantly. So just wanted to share that. I thought it was funny because of the relatively small amount, and show that I guess this is providing some credibility for me that I did have the highest scoring quarterback wide receiver stack. So anyways, moving right along, just wanted to share that with you guys. I mean, how big of a game did Deshaun Watson and Will Fuller have? I mean, amazing. We will get into that when we go through my lineups for this weekend. First thing I wanted to do was talk briefly about some of the stacks that I used, and I used multiple stacks this weekend for my 20 entry max builds, and they included the likes of Dak Prescott and Amari Cooper, Deshaun Watson and DeAndre Hopkins, Jameis Winston and Mike Evans, Carson Wentz and Alshon Jeffrey, Phillip Rivers and Keenan Allen, and lastly Tom Brady to Josh Gordon. So right off the bat, you can see that it was from those stacks that the wide receiver ones weren't the ones who had the best games, and weren't the best ones to pair up with the quarterback in DeAndre Hopkins, in Mike Evans, and in Josh Gordon. Those applied. Whereas instead it was, of course, we know Will Fuller, Chris Godwin, and then Julian Edelman, who were the wide receivers that you wanted to pair up those three quarterbacks with. Of those 6 stacks that I used in varying degrees and all across different contests and tournaments, the lowest performing was the Phillip Rivers to Keenan Allen, which was in this my third best lineup in the Millionaire Maker contest. And going into the afternoon, I was in a position to pivot. I had quite a few shares of Keenan Allen, and getting ready to go into the afternoon games, the thought had crossed my mind if I wanted to pivot on to more Amari Cooper, and or Aaron Jones. There's the number, whoever was in the afternoon games, but I didn't, and especially for the lineups that had Phillip Rivers, I wasn't going to be pivoting off of those stacks, but when it wasn't a Phillip Rivers lineup, then should have probably bought some more shares of Amari Cooper for the afternoon. What happened in that game with Aaron Jones, who was also could have been another good pivot move if you had a flex spot open in the afternoon. They got up big, Green Bay did, and scored early, and then Dallas just had to keep passing, and we know that Ezekiel Elliott wasn't as involved in the offense as everybody had predicted and hoped for, and then Amari Cooper was just having an amazing game. I think he had his new career high in receiving yards. So that was the highest performing stack, was Dak Prescott to Amari Cooper, the 71.82 Draftkings points, only costing 12.8K combined, 5.6 to 1 times their salary. And then in tournaments, we're looking for 4 times the salary, $50,000 to spend. You're looking for 200 plus points to be in the mix. This weekend was a very high scoring weekend, given that a lot of value plays went, there were multiple 40-point performances and even a couple of 50-point performances by some players. So the winning lineup was over 300 6x this weekend, which was just an amazing feat. That's a high number. So it's all relative. We're saying like, it needs to be 4x, needs to be 3x for cash, it needs to be 4x for tournaments. But if the chalk hits and if there's just high scoring games, high scoring weeks, then it's not going to guarantee you that you're making very much money whatsoever. The second highest performing stack was the Watson to Hopkins for the stacks that I used. 60.54 points at 14.5K. That provided 4.18x. The third best was the Brady to Josh Gordon. They scored 38.82 points and cost 12.6K, so 3.08x. The fourth best was Carson Wentz to Alshon Jeffrey. They scored 23.26 points and cost 12K, or only 1.94x. So all of these are not hitting even cash game values, and they were using in tournaments. The Winston and Evans was what I went with in my cash games. Sadly, to get a 0, it didn't go over so well. 17.46 points all from Jameis Winston at 13.3K, so 1.31x. And then last but not least, lastly, I'm trying to give them some credit because there was a high point total. They weren't supposed to do that poorly, was the Phillip Rivers to Keenan Allen, but they had a good pass rush going, and Denver that is, and trying to get Melvin Gordon included back into the offense did not really go so well. He was showing signs of rust, and with the tough coverage on Keenan Allen all day, they were forced to take what the defense was giving them, which wasn't much all day. And at 11.94 points, costing 13.1K between the two of them, only good for 0.91x, so not even a 1 times multiple of their salary. But I just wanted to share that with you guys, that this week we went with just 2-man stacks. Sometimes the optimizer threw in another third player, sometimes it did not, and this is just kind of what we ended up with. Sometimes it ran it back with another guy, sometimes it included another guy on the same team. So I was just going to go ahead and go through these 3 lineups. In 231,682nd place out of 235,288 entries, good for 98.47 percentile, and at 96.5% ownership, scoring 88.54 points. This was not a great lineup. Phillip Rivers 3%. He finished with 211 passing yards and 2 interceptions, -3 rushing yards. Paired him up with Keenan Allen at 10.4%. He only was able to haul in 4 catches for 18 yards. I mentioned he was getting good coverage. This lineup also included Travis Benjamin. Should have probably been Mike Williams, but it tried to give me better players up top instead of averaging it out. So it gives me the 0.1% Travis Benjamin, who gets 1 catch for 13 yards. And then they included Philip Lindsay, ran back with the RB for Denver, who is in somewhat of a timeshare with Royce Freeman, but still the number one at only 4.5%. He gets 114 total rushing yards, 1 rushing touchdown, gets the bonus, and then also hauls in 4 catches for 33 yards. So a really good play was Philip Lindsay. Ezekiel Elliott at 26.7% owned, running back. He finished with 62 rushing yards, a rushing touchdown, and then 2 catches for 29 receiving yards. So for one of the more expensive players, it didn't pay off as well as some of the other plays of the week had. And I talked about it in last week's video, how when you spend up, you have to have you have to hit on the players that you spend up on in your salary. It's okay if Travis Benjamin doesn't quite hit because it's a very low amount of your salary, but then you need everybody else in your lineup to do well. This wide receiver combo included Larry Fitzgerald. He hauled in 6 catches for 58 yards in a game against a game with 2 bad teams, the Cincinnati Bengals in Cincinnati. Arizona was able to pull it off, mostly due to Kyler Murray rushing and throwing, and with Christian Kirk out, there was supposed to be potentially more offense to be had in this game, but they weren't able to convert a lot of their tries, both of the teams in this game. A lot of field goals that were down inside the 10-yard line. Julio Jones in the game between the Atlanta Falcons and the Houston Texans, he hauled in 3 catches for 42 yards at 20.9% ownership. Mohamed Sanu and Calvin Ridley were able to get into the end zone, and Devontae Freeman. Julio Jones was not. At tight end, Mark Andrews, 13.2% owned, and back and forth good game between the Baltimore Ravens and the Pittsburgh Steelers. He hauled in 5 catches for 45 receiving yards. I believe it was Marquise Brown who got in the end zone, and then Mark Ingram, a short touchdown run, and Mark Andrews was not able to get into the end zone. And lastly, this lineup included the Buccaneers defense, who were on the road in the Dome against the Saints. They got 1 interception and then gave up 31 points to Teddy Bridgewater, so not a very good lineup whatsoever. We knew that. It was in the 98.5 percentile, so just move right along. In these tournaments, you want to differentiate in some ways, and you want to. Sometimes you're going to have very low scoring lineups, especially since I'm going with 3 lineups that are all over the place to try to make sure that I'm going to be contrarian and then also have some of the higher owned players mixed in. So you get some low, some medium, some high, which is what happened this week. So second best lineup this week, 130.16 points. It finished in the 183,746 spot, or good for 78.09 percentile, and it was 119.8% owned. So higher owned. but not the highest owned. As you see, we still have a number of guys under 10% owned, and then looks like 2 guys who were 25 to 30% owned. This lineup was Jameis Winston, 9.9%. He finished with 204 passing yards, 13 rushing yards, and 2 passing touchdowns. He had a very big game last weekend against the Rams, and going into the Dome in a divisional game against the New Orleans Saints, the Saints did a pretty good job of stopping their offense. And I paired him with Mike Evans. He had no stats, 10% owned of the field, all got zeros from him. And it was a good defense for the Saints the last 2 weeks, beating the Dallas Cowboys Sunday night last weekend, and then beating a Tampa Bay Buccaneers team that just beat the Rams last Sunday and was flying high and scoring a lot of points. So good job by the Saints. Not good news for me in this lineup, but what are you going to do? No run back in this lineup. Instead, it was a 3 running back lineup. So it had Le'Veon Bell at 6.4% against the Philadelphia Eagles. The Philadelphia Eagles was the top scoring defense of the week. And I thought that Le'Veon Bell, I had a decent amount of shares of him this weekend, that he could be good, especially with their quarterback situation being a backup playing. They're going to dump it off to Le'Veon Bell when they get a chance, and the full point PPR in garbage time could have potentially led to Le'Veon Bell having a huge game, and if he got into the end zone once, it would have been a good play. He only had 43 rushing yards, but he had 7 catches for 45 receiving yards, so the logic was okay in this one, but he wasn't going to have a huge 2-touchdown game that we would have needed out of him, probably. James White at 12.1% ownership for the New England Patriots, taking on a Washington Redskins team that has just recently let go Jay Gruden as their head coach. So we'll have to wait and see what is going to happen out there. Mentioned in the last video that I finished John Gruden's book, and he mentioned a lot about his brother and a big family guy, and how Jay Gruden was actually a much better quarterback than John Gruden was, given that he's a little bit bigger, a little taller, but a little bit better of an athlete. But the stuff that he knows in his career in the Arena League, he's very knowledgeable. I don't see it out of the realm of possibilities that he might even end up with the Raiders in the interim. So James White, with Rex Burkhead being inactive for the Patriots, was going to see most of the receptions out of the backfield. He did get 6 catches for 46 receiving yards and then chipped in 26 rushing yards. This was the week where they were big, huge favorites, and they were going to be giving the ball to Sony Michel, who got right around 20 carries, which is what you're shooting for out of your running backs. So there just wasn't enough for James White in this one. And then they did throw a touchdown to a running back out of the backfield. It was to Brandon Bolden, so it very well could have been a play for James White, where he scored the touchdown out of the backfield receiving, but it was not. It was Brandon Bolden this week. This lineup, like I mentioned, I had a lot of Keenan Allen. I think he was my highest owned player. At only 10.4% ownership, I think a lot of people were fading him, maybe because of the matchup. Maybe they knew that he was going to be getting shadowed at the last minute, and then they were off of him. But I think a lot of people faded him because it was supposed to be high ownership as well. And then at only 10.4%, I had a lot of leverage on him. I mentioned that earlier. It would have been nice to buy some more shares of Amari Cooper, but wasn't to be. Wide receiver Auden Tate from the Cincinnati Bengals was the chalky, cheap wide receiver. He was fairly good chalk, this week as he got in the end zone. 3 catches for 26 yards and a receiving touchdown. At 29.1% owned. Tight end in this lineup was Noah Fant. Did not work out. Only 1 catch for 6 yards. They didn't need to pass as they were up quite a bit, and they were able to run and used him mostly for blocking. This lineup did have Christian McCaffrey, 24.7% owned. Humongous day again. He's in the MVP running, some most scrimmage yards. I think I saw a stat that he had more scrimmage yards than the top 2 running backs behind him. It was Ezekiel Elliott, and then I can't remember who the next best guy was, but pretty amazing stuff what Christian McCaffrey has been able to do. He had 176 rushing yards, gets the bonus, and 2 rushing touchdowns. Then he had 6 catches for 61 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown for 50.7 fantasy points. And then paired with the Panthers defense at 12.3% owned, 2 sacks, 3 fumble recoveries, and they scored a touchdown against the Jaguars in a very good, competitive, interesting game to watch, with Gardner Minshew finding DJ Chark and TD Westbrook on the other side. And that was a good game. So not in the money over this lineup either. So moving on to the last lineup, which was a pretty good lineup for me. It was fun watching this lineup in the mornings and in the afternoons. Unfortunately, like it's mentioned, it did include Keenan Allen in the afternoon, and then you add an extra 37 points with pivoting to Amari Cooper, then it could have been really, really good. So this lineup is what got me that extra $6 in my pocket, with the stack of Deshaun Watson to Will Fuller. But it wasn't my initial stack. As I mentioned earlier, it was Deshaun Watson and DeAndre Hopkins, but then they decided to throw Will Fuller in also into this lineup. So this lineup finished in the 5,348th place, which is good for the 2.27th percentile. So top 2.5% lineup, which is really good. And it had a total ownership of 122.7%. So once again, my highest owned lineup was actually the highest performing lineup, and I guess it's like a balance of, you need the chalky plays who do well to go and have the good games. You can't have the bad chalk. But I guess over 9 positions, you're only talking about an average of 13 or 14% owned on each person. The key to this lineup was, like I mentioned, the Deshaun Watson to Will Fuller. Deshaun Watson 13.9%, 426 passing yards, 47 rushing yards. He gets the bonus, and then he had 5 passing touchdowns. Will Fuller caught 3 of them. He had 14 total catches, 217 receiving yards, and then 3 touchdowns. He gets the bonus. Another 50-point performance this week. It also had DeAndre Hopkins, 19.9% owned, 7 catches for 88 yards. Just misses out on the bonus. Just misses out on, and then he misses out on the touchdowns. I'm going to go up to the running backs. This lineup had Leonard Fournette at 13.9%, who got a lot of carries and ended up eclipsing 100 yards, 108 rushing yards, gets the bonus, and then added 4 catches for 29 receiving yards, and he got a rushing touchdown. It was a good performance. Obviously, it would have been nice to have all of the top options, but you have to save salary at some place, and I guess it would have been at DeAndre Hopkins, not having him and potentially being able to get up to Christian McCaffrey, or not having Keenan Allen and going with somebody else. Josh Jacobs for the Oakland Raiders in London, only 1.3% owned against the Chicago Bears defense, who is a great defense, just they're so much better when they're playing in Chicago. This was a neutral site. Anything could happen. The Raiders were there all week, so they were maybe better well adjusted. And then Josh Jacobs had a good game. 123 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, gets the bonus, and then he had 3 catches for 20 receiving yards. He also had to leave the game, but then came back, and in that span, DeAndre Washington ran in another touchdown. So they were able to run the ball really well against the Bears, excuse me. And my third wide receiver spot, I had Michael Thomas, who had another huge game, which was similar to Will Fuller's output. 11 catches for 182 receiving yards, gets the bonus, and then 2 receiving touchdowns at 23.7%. He was talked a lot about all week about how he was mispriced. Tyler Eifert was the chalky tight end going against Arizona. That was didn't hit for them this week. Everybody's been targeting against Arizona Cardinals, the tight end position, and he only hauled in 2 catches for 14 yards. Keenan Allen in the flex, and then the Chargers defense. So although Keenan Allen wasn't doing very much for me in the afternoon, the Chargers defense was scoring a few points, getting sacks, getting that punt return for a touchdown, which always helps. I was really rooting for Keenan Allen to do a little something, and he did not. So those were my 3 lineups for this weekend. I do want to go ahead and then also show the winning Millionaire Maker lineup for the week and show how he was able to get it done. The check 182 takes home the $1 million. 118.9% total ownership. So in that same range that I had my top 2 lineups, 119 and 122, he had 118.9. He went with Teddy Bridgewater to Michael Thomas and had Jared Cook as well in a double stack, 2.7%. Teddy Bridgewater 314 passing yards, 4 passing touchdowns, 7 rushing yards, 1 pick, gets the bonus. At home in the Dome, gets that performance boost with the ideal conditions. Michael Thomas, we talked about, had a very good game. Jared Cook also was able to get into the end zone at 3.6% owned, going with someone who is touchdown dependent, getting to get red zone looks last year with Oakland. He was their top receiving option, and it paid off in this lineup. 4 catches for 41 yards and a touchdown. And it was ran back with Chris Godwin, the right Tampa Bay Buccaneer wide receiver this week, 14.8% owned, 7 catches for 125 yards and 2 receiving touchdowns, so it was doing very well. He has Christian McCaffrey, who was the top running back. Then he also had James White, so it didn't kill him, 13.2%. And then a late flex option with Aaron Jones, who had 4 rushing touchdowns, 107 rushing yards, gets the bonus, and then 7 catches for 75 receiving yards. Who I just mentioned that Christian McCaffrey was the number 1 running back, but it looks like Aaron Jones got him just by that much in the afternoon. And lastly, the very important part of this lineup, the Eagles defense, 6.8% owned. We're the highest scoring defense, 35 fantasy points, more than Chris Godwin by 0.5 point. 10 sacks, 2 picks, 1 fumble recovery, 2 touchdowns, and only give up 6 points to the New York Jets. So that was the winning Millionaire Maker lineup. If you guys watched this far, please go ahead and like this video. Comment down below what you thought about the stacks that we talked about today. Were there any other stacks that you used that didn't pan out for you this weekend? And talk if you want to comment down below about the ownership projections, because we're really trying to hone that in, pay attention. And if there is anything else that you guys questions, then just drop them down in the comment section. Really appreciate you all tuning in, and glad that I could do another video for you guys to recap the Millionaire Maker contest. And we're just going to go ahead and then keep firing at these and seeing if we can get lucky and see how well we can do. Hopefully soon I'll be able to have another high finish to share with you guys. So thanks so much, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.